A team of federal agents, some of the most trained law enforcement officers in the country, surrounded in a warehouse by armed criminals who believe they've just pulled off the perfect trap. The gangsters are confident, weapons drawn, thinking they've cornered their prey and there's no way out. The agents inside can hear the threats being shouted, can see the shadows moving outside the building, can feel the walls closing in. Communication with headquarters is spotty at best. The situation is deteriorating by the second, but what those criminals outside don't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine in their wildest nightmares, is that 9 fighter jets are already screaming through the sky toward their exact location. In just minutes, the most overwhelming show of force these gangsters have ever witnessed is about to turn their moment of triumph into their moment of absolute terror. This is the story of how one operation went from a routine investigation to a military-level response that would be talked about for years to come. The operation had started weeks earlier with what seemed like a straightforward case. A criminal organization had been moving illegal goods through a network of warehouses and distribution centers, operating with a level of sophistication that had initially puzzled investigators. They weren't your typical street-level criminals. These were organized, methodical, and dangerously well-connected. The FBI had been building a case slowly, gathering evidence, tracking movements, identifying key players in the organization. It was the kind of patient, detail-oriented work that federal agents specialize in, the kind of investigation that requires months of surveillance, countless hours reviewing financial records, and the careful cultivation of informants who could provide insight into the inner workings of the criminal enterprise. Special Agent Marcus Chen had been leading the investigation from the beginning. A 15-year veteran of the Bureau, Chen had earned a reputation for his analytical mind and his ability to see patterns that others missed. He'd worked organized crime cases before, had testified in federal court dozens of times, and had a conviction rate that made him one of the most respected agents in his field office. But even Chen had to admit that this particular organization was different. They were careful, almost paranoid in their operational security. They changed locations frequently, used encrypted communications, and had clearly learned from the mistakes of other criminal groups who had been taken down in the past. It was going to take something special to crack this case wide open, and Chen knew it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A low-level member of the organization, picked up on an unrelated charge, decided he'd rather cooperate than face the lengthy prison sentence he was looking at. The information he provided was gold. He gave them locations, names, schedules, and most importantly, he told them about a major shipment that was coming through one of the organization's primary warehouses. If the FBI could catch them in the act, with the goods and the key players all in one location, they could effectively decapitate the entire operation in a single night. It was the opportunity Chen and his team had been waiting for. The planning for the operation took 2 weeks. Chen assembled a team of 8 agents, all experienced, all with backgrounds in high-risk operations. They studied the warehouse layout, planned their approach routes, identified positions for surveillance, and ran through various scenarios of how the night might unfold. They coordinated with local law enforcement, making sure backup would be available if needed, but the plan was for the FBI team to handle the arrests themselves. It was supposed to be quick and clean. Get in position, wait for the shipment to arrive, confirm the presence of the key targets, and then move in with overwhelming force. The criminals would be caught red-handed, and the case would be wrapped up neatly. That was the plan anyway. The night of the operation, everything started according to schedule. The team moved into position around the warehouse just after dark, taking up locations that gave them clear sightlines to all the entrances and exits. The building was exactly as their informant had described. A large, industrial structure in a somewhat isolated area, perfect for the kind of illegal activity the organization was conducting. Chen and 3 other agents positioned themselves in a location where they could observe the main entrance, while the other team members covered the remaining access points. They settled in to wait, knowing from experience that these operations often required patience. The first sign that something was wrong came about an hour into the surveillance. Chen noticed vehicles approaching the warehouse, but not from the direction they'd expected. Instead of the delivery trucks they'd been told to watch for, several civilian cars were pulling up and people were getting out. Lots of people, more than should have been there for a simple shipment. Chen felt the first prickle of unease. He radioed his team, told them to stay alert, and adjusted his position to get a better view. What he saw made his blood run cold. These weren't just criminals gathering for a transaction. They were armed, heavily armed, and they were moving with purpose, spreading out around the perimeter of the warehouse in a way that looked disturbingly tactical. Within minutes, it became clear that the FBI team hadn't caught the criminals by surprise. The criminals had been expecting them. Someone had talked, or the organization's security was even better than they'd thought, because what was unfolding was not an arrest operation, but an ambush. The gangsters, at least 20 of them now visible, had effectively surrounded the FBI agents' positions. Chen heard shouts in the darkness, heard the unmistakable sound of weapons being charged, and realized with sickening clarity that his team was in serious trouble. He immediately called for backup, using the radio to contact headquarters with a code that indicated an emergency situation. The response was instant. Help was on the way, he was told, but it would take time. Local police units were being scrambled, additional FBI resources were being mobilized, but they were at least 20 minutes out, possibly longer. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours given the situation Chen and his team were facing. The gangsters were closing in, using hand signals and coordinated movements that suggested military training or at least extensive preparation for exactly this kind of confrontation. One of the criminals, apparently the leader, called out to the agents, his voice carrying across the open space around the warehouse. He knew they were federal agents, he said. He knew they'd been watching the organization. And now, he declared with evident satisfaction, they were trapped. The warehouse they'd been watching wasn't even the real location for the shipment. It was bait, he explained, a carefully constructed trap to lure in law enforcement and send a message that this particular criminal organization was not to be trifled with. The agents could surrender now, he suggested, or things could get very ugly, very quickly. Chen assessed their situation rapidly. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The positions they'd taken for surveillance didn't provide much cover if an actual firefight broke out. Retreat wasn't really an option with hostiles surrounding their location. But surrender. That wasn't even on the table. He'd heard the stories, knew what happened to law enforcement officers who fell into the hands of organized criminal groups. The best they could hope for was to hold their position, keep the criminals at bay long enough for backup to arrive, and pray that the situation didn't escalate into open combat before help got there. What Chen didn't know, what none of the agents pinned down around that warehouse knew, was that the moment the emergency call went out, things had started moving at the highest levels of law enforcement and beyond. The FBI's Tactical Operations Center had immediately recognized this wasn't just a backup request for a routine operation gone sideways. This was federal agents under direct threat from a heavily armed criminal force, and the response needed to be proportionate to the danger. Calls were made, authorizations were given, and resources that rarely get deployed for domestic law enforcement operations were suddenly being activated. At an Air National Guard base, pilots were scrambling to their aircraft. 9 fighter jets, sleek and deadly, were being prepared for immediate deployment. This wasn't a combat mission in the traditional sense, but it was absolutely a show of force operation. The authorization had come from the very top. Federal agents were in danger, and the response needed to be overwhelming, needed to be so shocking that the criminals threatening them would immediately understand they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. The pilots received their briefing quickly, proceed to the coordinates, arrive in formation, conduct multiple low passes over the location, and remain on station until the situation on the ground was resolved. They were in the air within minutes, their jets cutting through the night sky at speeds that would have them over the warehouse in less time than most of the people on the ground would have believed possible. Back at the warehouse, the situation was deteriorating. The gangsters, emboldened by their numerical superiority and apparently convinced they had the upper hand, were getting bolder. Some of them were moving closer to the agents' positions, weapons visible, shouting threats and demands. Chen could see the confidence in their movements, the swagger of people who believed they'd already won. He kept his team calm on the radio, reminded them of their training, told them to hold position and watch their sectors. But privately, he was running through scenarios, calculating odds, and not liking any of the conclusions he was reaching. One of the criminals fired a shot into the air, the sound cracking through the night like a whip. It was a warning, the leader shouted, a demonstration that they were serious and that the agent's time was running out. The next shots, he promised, wouldn't be fired into the air. Chen felt his jaw tighten. This was spiraling out of control fast. He radioed headquarters again, asking for an update on the backup. Still several minutes out, he was told. And then the operator added something else, something that Chen almost couldn't process in the moment. Additional resources were inbound, air assets, and he needed to keep his team's heads down because when those assets arrived, things were going to get very loud, very fast. Air assets? Chen's mind raced. What kind of air assets? Helicopters? That would make sense for a backup operation, maybe surveillance birds with spotlights and forward-looking infrared to identify positions. But the way the operator had said it, the urgency in the tone, suggested something more. Chen didn't have time to think about it further. The criminals were moving again, and he needed to focus on the immediate threat in front of him. Then they heard it. At first, it was just a distant sound, a rumble that might have been thunder except the sky was clear. But it grew rapidly, became a roar, became a sound so powerful that it seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Everyone, criminals and agents alike, looked up instinctively, searching the night sky for the source of that incredible noise. And then they saw them. 9 fighter jets, flying in tight formation, appeared out of the darkness like something from another world. They came in low, so low that the sound of their engines was physically painful, a thunderous roar that drowned out everything else and made rational thought almost impossible. The jets screamed over the warehouse at a height that seemed impossibly close, their running lights visible, their sheer power and speed evident to everyone below. The message was unmistakable. Whatever was happening on the ground, the United States government had just demonstrated that it could bring overwhelming force to bear in minutes, if necessary. The effect on the criminals was immediate and absolute. The confidence evaporated like morning mist under a scorching sun. Weapons were dropped, hands went into the air, and the bravado that had characterized their behavior just moments before disappeared entirely. These were men who'd been willing to threaten federal agents, who'd set up an ambush and believed they could get away with it. But the appearance of military aircraft changed the entire equation. This wasn't a confrontation with local police or even federal agents anymore. This was the full weight of government power making itself known, and every single criminal on the ground understood instantly that they were completely and utterly outmatched. The jets made several more passes, each one as thunderously impressive as the first, maintaining formation and demonstrating with every flyover that this was a coordinated, authorized operation, not some spontaneous show of force. The pilots, professional and precise, executed their mission perfectly, turning the night sky into a demonstration of aerial dominance that left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. By the time the ground backup units arrived, streaming in with lights and sirens, now that stealth was no longer necessary, the criminals were already in various stages of surrender. Some were on their knees with hands behind their heads, others were face down on the ground, and all of them looked shaken to their core. The leader, the same man who'd been so confident just minutes earlier, was found sitting against a wall, staring at the sky with an expression that suggested he was re-evaluating every life choice that had led him to this moment. The arrests went smoothly after that. 23 criminals were taken into custody without any further resistance. Not a single shot had been fired by either side after the jets appeared. The agents were safe, the criminals were in custody, and what could have become a deadly confrontation had been resolved without casualties. As Chen watched the prisoners being loaded into transport vehicles, he couldn't help but replay those moments when the jets appeared, couldn't stop thinking about how completely the situation had been transformed in seconds. In the days and weeks that followed, the operation became something of a legend within law enforcement circles. The story spread, details getting shared in briefings and training sessions, used as an example of how rapid escalation and overwhelming response could be used to de-escalate dangerous situations. The criminal organization was effectively dismantled, with the arrests that night providing enough evidence to roll up the entire network. Dozens more arrests followed, charges were filed, and the organization that had seemed so sophisticated and untouchable was broken apart completely. The 9 pilots who flew that night received commendations, though the operation remained relatively quiet in public reporting. The FBI agents involved were recognized for their professionalism under pressure, their ability to maintain discipline in a situation that could easily have become catastrophic. And Chen, looking back on the operation, found himself profoundly grateful for the coordination and resources that had made such a dramatic rescue possible. For the criminals who'd been so confident that night, the memory of those jets appearing out of the darkness became a defining moment. In their interrogations, several of them admitted that they genuinely believed they had the upper hand, right up until the moment they heard that sound, saw those aircraft, and realized they'd made a mistake of epic proportions. They'd thought they were confronting a small team of federal agents. Instead, they'd triggered a response that brought military aircraft screaming out of the night sky, a response so overwhelming that resistance became unthinkable. The operation stood as a testament to several things: the importance of backup systems and escalation protocols, the value of interagency cooperation when law enforcement officers are in danger, and the sheer psychological impact of overwhelming force when applied at the right moment. Those criminals had been willing to threaten federal agents, had been confident in their numbers and their weapons, but when faced with the reality of what the government could bring to bear when its agents were threatened, that confidence had shattered completely. The warehouse where it all happened still stands, now empty and quiet, but those who know the story sometimes drive by and look at it, imagining what that night must have been like, picturing those jets appearing out of the darkness like avenging angels, their roar drowning out everything else, and changing the entire dynamic in seconds. It's a reminder that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that gets fired, but the one that makes firing any weapon seem pointless. Chen retired from the FBI several years later, but that night remained one of the defining moments of his career. He'd led investigations that resulted in major arrests, had testified in high-profile cases, had done work that genuinely made communities safer, but nothing quite matched the experience of being pinned down by criminals one moment and then watching the cavalry arrive in the form of 9 fighter jets the next. It was a story he shared carefully, understanding the sensitive nature of such operations, but also recognizing the value of the lesson it provided about preparation, backup, and the importance of never underestimating the resources that can be brought to bear when federal agents are in danger. The criminals from that night, those who eventually went to trial, received substantial sentences. The attempted assault on federal officers, combined with the evidence gathered about their criminal enterprise, meant that most of them were looking at decades in prison. In their cells, some of them probably still sometimes hear that sound in their memories, that incredible roar of 9 fighter jets streaking through the night sky, and remember the moment when their plan fell apart, completely and irreversibly. And if you want, tell me from which corner of the world you're watching this video. Your comment matters, and I want to read it and reply to you. For more exciting stories like this one, click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.